So, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak to you. So, what is the first symptom of heart disease? Does anybody know what the first symptom of heart disease is? The first symptom of heart disease is death. I don't know if you knew that or not. So, this is true. This is true. You can look it up. So imagine you go to your doctor's office, and you know you have heart disease. You're one of the few people who really knows you have it really bad. So you go to your doctor on a weekly basis. And you show up, and your doctor goes, "Oh, you're here. All right. That's 4 weeks. That's 28 days. Great. We'll see you next week. Hopefully." And you leave. That's your doctor's appointment. Pretty scary, right? So let's imagine you're a security leader, AppSec leader, and you go to your engineering stand-up or weekly engineering meeting. It's your turn to speak, and you say, "No incidents this week. No 0 days. No, any sort of nefarious activity, whatever." Everyone gives you a rounding applause. And you say, "Oh wait, there's more. This is the third week that we've reported this. That's 21 days," and people applaud you even more and actually give you some pats on the back, and you sit down. The first story is not true. Well, I hope not. The second story is. I have more than once heard this as a means of sharing metrics. Now, of course, when something bad happens, they throw up slides and talk about betterments and what have you. But typically, the demonstration or the sharing of metrics or measurements is nothing bad happened. We want to fix that. Okay. So, to fix that, I think we need to start to understand a little bit more about measurement outside of security. Security is a fairly insular community. We tend to, I don't know, we're kind of like North Korea. We tend to just stay within ourselves. Like cops, they like to eat donuts with themselves. We security folks like to invent methods of measurement all within ourselves. I think there's an opportunity to look outside of ourselves. And so that's what I want to do here today. Look a little bit outside ourselves. We'll look at some code and a few other things like that. And I will talk fast. I have a lot of slides. So let's look at how some measurement experts out of security look at measurement and see if it can inform us. You might recognize a few of these people. So we'll talk about the concept of measurement that others have that maybe we could start adopting for ourselves. So here's a famous guy. You might know him. His view: as far as the propositions of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. It's a great quote. Here's another one, Bertrand Russell. You probably know this guy, right? "Although this may seem a paradox, all exact science is based on the idea of approximation. If a man tells you he knows a thing exactly, then you can be safe in inferring that you're speaking to an inexact man." Here's another one. This is a great one. Carl Pearson. I don't know if you're familiar with Carl Pearson. "If you haven't measured something, you really don't know very much about it." His book, called The Grammar of Science, was super influential on Einstein. I mean, he actually shared it with a bunch of his buddies at the Olympia Club. And a lot of the major theories we have in physics and otherwise are really predicated on his work. And the answer to what is the grammar of science, it actually is statistics, interestingly enough. He also said, "All great scientists have, in a certain sense, been great artists. The man with no imagination may collect facts, but he cannot make great discoveries." I think that's really cool. I like that idea of the creativity associated with science. And I think as you go up the echelon in scientists, you'll find a lot of creativity. Here's one that's a little closer home to us, and particularly for me in the Bay Area, Professor Ronald Howard, not to be confused with the actor, movie star. He is considered the father of decision analysis. A lot to learn from him. The whole idea of probability is to be able to describe by numbers your ignorance, or equivalently, your knowledge. And I like that. One thing I'd say for you, if you're to take away anything from these four people, is that in their measurement, they retain their sense of uncertainty. You can call it your sense of wonder, but they don't look to eliminate uncertainty. They certainly don't also look to overinflate uncertainty. And I would argue that in security, oftentimes we go back to, was the red, yellow, amber. Instead of using real mathematical measurement approaches that are available to us, we say, okay, well, we're not sure if it's a high risk, so we'll call it a red. That's actually taking something that maybe is probably countable and just making it harder for people to understand. It might make them more comfortable, but it doesn't help their understanding. I mean, in the sciences, we call that a placebo. So the object of measurement. This is what I consider to be the object of measurement for us in security. I would suppose it's for anyone, but particularly for us. Beat the competing model. beat the competing model. So let me give you an example of beating the competing model. You've probably heard the joke, two campers are out camping, and one of them stops and puts running shoes on. The other camper says, hey, why are you putting running shoes on? And the first camper says, well, I've heard there are bears out here. The first camper says, well, you certainly will not outrun a bear. He said, well, no, my intention is to outrun you. So this is very important for us. I think oftentimes when we're unsure how good we need to be better than what we are now. The bad guys are. The bad guys are always going to be better. Always. So therefore, we should always be competing against ourselves. To do that, though, we need to have a good sense of where we are, right? And I would argue that that's a challenge for our industry because we haven't adopted methods, I think, from outside of ourselves. So let's talk further about the object of measurement and maybe learn some things from others. In fact, in the natural sciences, this is an old picture of manatees. These are, they don't look like manatees, but those are manatees, and those are manatees with scars and very cool names like Donna, Flash, and Floyd, and Phyllis. In the Florida Everglades and what have you, they are noticing that manatees were showing up really scarred. And their hypothesis was that manatees are dying, and they were because of boat propellers. And the remediation in this case was to put like these rubber sort of things around blades to reduce this. But manatees kept dying. They kept dying. What they realized once they observed dead manatees, as opposed to looking at the live one with scars, is that the manatees were dying by being rammed, or being killed by being rammed with boats, right? They had the wrong object, great intention, but wrong object of measurement. There's another great example from World War II in terms of armoring bombers. In armoring bombers, they looked at bombers that came back and they looked at where the holes were in the bombers. And they go, well, obviously we need to put more armor in in these, how can I point at, along the wings and things like that. Once they started observing bombers that didn't make it back, they noticed that there were a lot of holes like where people were, the people were, and where the engines were. Yes, another Moneyball thing. You guys are all familiar, I suppose, with Moneyball. And again, the hypothesis or premise in Moneyball was that the industry at large had the wrong object of measurement. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the industry was looking at RBIs as a major quantifier for determining, who wins, and for valuing players, right, slugging, whatnot, and for paying them, and whole things like that. And what necessity is a mother of invention. Actually, necessity is a mother of invention, and boredom is its father. So what they realized was that for the A's, they had some constraints. They had some financial constraints, and they realized that, gosh, there's got to be some better way for us to figure out how to win at a cheaper cost, right? Sound familiar? And they realized, they did some simple regression analysis, very, very simple, and they realized, oh my gosh, it seems that just getting on base, first base, it sounds like high school or junior high, just getting on base, that's all that matters. And that is the highest, by far the highest correlation to winning. And in fact, oftentimes the people who get on base are highly correlate with not being paid a lot. Isn't that interesting? Meaning correlation to winning, getting on base, correlation to low pay, getting on base. And the A's did great. Then everyone else caught on because that's a competing model, and everyone else started winning. And now it gets really, really tough. So this is great. Having great objects of measurement. So we have the methods of measurement, retaining our uncertainty, and the object of measurement is getting really clear about what winning is or what losing is, depending on what your measurement is, right? So let's talk a little bit further about the object of measurement for us. I'm zeroing in here, okay? So what is the rate at which your security system allows new exploitable risks? Now, this is a kind of a Zen koan, I suppose. What is the rate at which your security system, you are responsible for a security system? Maybe it's AppSec, maybe you are in charge of the SDL, or maybe you have an enterprise concern, you're a CISO, right? Your system, you're creating an information security management system, and it's that system which allows your company to excrete risk, okay? And what does that look like? To me, it looks like this. There is a rate at which, let's say even externally, there's a rate at which you produce new risk, right? So by the way, the definition of accuracy, I love this, I don't know that I made this up, but the definition of accuracy actually is the size and how long your targets persist and how fast they move. So accuracy, I make you as a bad guy more accurate by creating larger, slower moving, longer persisting targets. That is the definition of accuracy. So my question is, what is the rate? We should measure the rate at which your companies excrete risk in various form factors. So what is the time to live for exploitable risk, let's say? You're responsible for that too. So we have two things here. Measuring the rate at which you're creating new exploitable risk, measuring the rate at which you eliminate it, right? This becomes a mathematical unambiguous expression of attack surface that you're responsible for. And I'll say it again. The rate at which you produce new risk and the rate at which you, this is really survival analysis, get rid of new risk, that becomes a mathematical unambiguous expression of attack surface. That's my object of measurement. This is how I think about things. So what is the rate at which your security system allows new threats that exploit those risks to manifest? So that now we're getting at the threat side, right? There's a correlation there, but what is the rate at which your environment, the way you exude risk and the way that you then do cleanup or detection, what is the rate at which your security system allows new threats that exploit these risks to manifest? There's a rate to that. And then, of course, what is the time to live for the new threats that exploit these risks? How good are you at getting rid of bad guys that are cohabitating with you? So, to my fundamental thesis, this is what I argue for, and this is what it will be in my book, and all the algorithms and math and code and all that other scary stuff will really revolve around this. Prove that your capabilities are reducing the rate and time to live of threats and vulnerabilities by confronting your capabilities with data. So what does that look like in pretty pictures? So we talked about this. This is, you can consider this a vulnerability in all its depth and breadth, right? We're not just talking about OS scanning here. So we have a concern. We have vulnerabilities that are being exploited by bad guys. The question I have is, what's the correlation between, let's say in your SDL, your security design? What is the correlation between the growth of your attack surface, the rate specifically, which is mathematically determined, we'll get into, and threats? Is there a correlation, right, between this and that? A lot of statistics is all about that, by the way. Statistics is just weighting stuff with numbers. That's all it is. What about this? What about scanning in all its multifarious ways, right? SAS, DAS, whatever you have. What is the correlation between both the creation, right, and elimination of threats and vulnerabilities? What's the correlation of these things two working together? What's the weight of them working together? What about incident response, right? What does that impact have on this, mathematically speaking, where you have an outcome, which is we produce this product team, this series of Scrum teams, and or this whatever it is producing risk at this rate. What is the correlation of that rate, that number, with these activities? Right? We can do the same thing with patching, and you can actually correlate with the actual time to live or survival analysis. There's a lot of interesting things we can do to start asking these questions about how good are we? And are we specifically improving, right? Again, going back to beat the bear, I'm not competing against perfection. I'm competing typically against myself at the very least. Whatever my rate is, I want to always improve in it. The bad guys are always improving. You should always be improving as well. I think that's probably pretty fundamental. We get that. So let's talk about rates. I want to talk about rates in the way that a scientist might, particularly when they're highly uncertain, right? When they're highly uncertain. So let's talk about breach. I think breach is something we're all highly uncertain about, and I think breach is something that we'd all probably say is impossible to measure. Having never measured it, oftentimes security folks go and say it's impossible to measure, having not observed or tried. Let's try. Imagine you have a large jar. This is the proverbial statistics or probability book. You open it up, there'll be the urn of mystery. Here's ours. So what proportion is red? This is my question. What proportion is red? So imagine you have this magical urn. It's kind of like, it's an extra dimensional space. There could be billions and billions of marbles in it. There could be 5. You don't know. You're highly uncertain. Red is breach. Blue is no breach. So you pull out 5, and you get 1 red. So the question I have for you is not what the truth is, but if you were asked to make a bet, right? You're betting. You're like now a card counter, by the way, in the world of breach. If someone said you have to make a bet, what does the math tell you about making a bet? Not about reality. What does the model say about how you should be cheating right now? You should be betting that likely, based on the evidence that you have, it's somewhere between 1 and 45%. It's not real. It's only a model, right? The quote Monty Python, it's only a model. Camelot, it's only a model. So anyways, you put them back, you do 15 more. What does that tell you? What should you bet? Somewhere between 0.34% and 18%. Not real, but if you're forced to make a bet, the math says the true value is likely in there. You don't know, though. You're unsure. Randomly draw 75, red, boom. Between 1 and 8%. It very well be 90%. You don't know, but the math says if you're going to make a bet here. This just so happens to be the rate actually from 2014 to 2015 for Fortune 500 healthcare, which I worked in at the time. So if someone were to come to me and say, "Hey, Rich, and I worked for Fortune 500 healthcare, was responsible for security," they'd say, "Hey, what's the likelihood of us having a breach?" If some uninformed executive said that to me, I said, "Well, if you really mean it, I'll tell you. Chances are between 1 and 8%, but heck, I don't know. It's just what the math says." And I'm making a bet. So let's look at that. Let's look at Fortune 500 healthcare. The 1 year rate, the math says 3.85. This is based on hits and misses, which we're going to get into in depth here in a second. 3 year rate, about 11%. Fortune 500 to, this is finance, 2.4, 7.2. And it looks like this, right? This is what it actually looks like. Math retains our uncertainty. Our uncertainty is that stuff that's under the curve, right? Doesn't mean it's true. The math seems to think, the best math that we have that is most conservative, seems to think that that's what truth is. Okay, and we make some observations about that, this is from publicly disclosed breach. By the way, the fascinating thing about public breaches is they're all public. You have that information. There are a lot of private breaches. I'm not asking about that. I don't know about that. That's your business. We'll probably find out someday if it's bad enough, though. All right, so let's talk about these methods, the methods of understanding rate, and let's apply it to bug bounty. The reason I want to apply it to bug bounty is because I found that a lot of companies who are starting out in security, a lot of the myriad of thousands and thousands of startups that are in the Silicon Valley, oftentimes their first encounter with security will be bug bounty. They won't have an SDL. They'll say, okay, we're going to create software, and hopefully the bug bounty will find bad stuff before other bad guys find it. They call that security. True. It's still true. So before we get into this real quick, I just want to make one caveat here, because I'm going to be talking about Bayesian methods a lot, ish. The Reverend Bayes, we can credit him for this. By the way, he was a professional theologian and amateur, well, I guess an amateur Bayesian, although he is his namesake. But the methods we're going to use come from him. And the basic hypothesis for Bayesian methods is that we're updating our beliefs as we get more data, right? We're updating our beliefs. That's all it really is. As I get more data incrementally, I can become more certain or uncertain, but I'm not eliminating it. So every method that I'll show you actually could be updated real time. It could be to the millisecond, could be to the week, could be the hour. They're very simple. They're profoundly simple. I think some people might call it data science. I suppose my co-author's response to is what science is not data science. So rates applied to bug bounty beliefs. Let's talk about beliefs first. Here's some code. You don't need to understand it. You just need to know that I had some code somewhere, right? So you have some beliefs about breach. You certainly don't believe that your company is being breached 100% all the time, publicly, all applications. I would assume that that's not you. We haven't heard about that. I don't experience that. I have not seen that in my career. You have some beliefs about breach, and you can encode those beliefs. So for example, you could say, well, you know, if you ask me how often do I think we're going to be breached in a year, I don't really know, but gosh, I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Well, how about this? How often do you think, how about this? How often do you think we'll have exploitable vulnerabilities showing up externally? How about that? Or, you know, how often do you think bug bounty will find exploitable vulnerabilities externally? Well, I'd imagine we'll have something like 50 vuln days. And let's say I believe it's 50 vuln days, and I'm ambivalent, meaning it could be less or more, right? All right, but I'm 90% sure that on average we'll be, 100 days would be kind of like the 90% maximum, right? There's some true number that's below 90 days. I believe that. I don't know if it's real or not. So you can encode this, right? So what that means is, again, you 50-50 ambivalent here. You think that, you know, roughly, looks like you're, with the math here, it looks like maybe 17% of the time you believe that you're producing or excluding vulnerabilities that would be discoverable by bug bounty or otherwise, and you're 90% sure the true value is below 30%. All right, so let's talk about this now. So that's your beliefs. You've encoded your beliefs mathematically in the way that a scientist might. It's a model. So let's ask this. Now you have 1 week's worth of data. You've been alive, meaning that you've released bug bounties and you're ready. You've got your checkbook. You're ready to go ahead and start paying out. Right? So if you didn't use a Bayesian method, your prior beliefs about reality is this. And what this means is everything is likely, meaning you could be producing every single release you have is just chock full of always, every time, exploitable vulnerabilities that show up remotely. I don't think you believe that, but this is what we'd call, some people would say this is a very conservative approach. I'd say it's an anti-conservative. You haven't encoded your beliefs. I'm very interested in your beliefs, by the way, because in San Francisco, I pay a lot for people like you, and my assumption is you know something. I want to encode that. But so what happens here, that in this model right here, what I'm saying is I know nothing. I combine that with what I know about actual hits and misses at 7 days. In 7 days, let's say we had no bugs reported from bug bounty. Right, we had 7 days pass, that's 7 misses, 0 hits. When I encode that together, it looks like this. So I have this idea of I know nothing, this idea of, empirical data, and I mix those together, and this is my new idea. This is an idea, right? That doesn't tell me a whole lot. Now, if I go about through a process saying, okay, well, how about I combine what my experts know? This is an idea. It's a belief. It's a model. I combine that with actual data that we have for 7 days. It ends up looking like this. It's not truth, but I think you guys know something. If you've been working for a company that I come and become CISO and you've been there for a year or two, I'm going to assume you know something. You'd better, or you're not going to be there any longer. But anyways, this is how this comes together. So let's talk a little bit more about this. Let's take a look at a full year. Now we're going to have a lot of empirical data, 365 days. We're counting this. In fact, I don't know how many of you have been using a bug bounty service for over a year. I'm not selling bug bounty, by the way. But how many of you have, most of you, oh, come on, most of you have been inning for more than 2 years, right? 2? Okay, yeah, great. You have this data. Your service has this data. You can do this now. All of this you can do right now. And if you need help, I'll help you. So let's look at this real quick. So the gray was our beliefs, right? You notice how the gray, it's very wide and very low. This means I'm highly uncertain. That's 7 days. That's the black, right? 180 days is the green. And then the red would be a whole year. I'm 90% confident that the true value is between those two red dotted numbers right there. My confidence interval is between the true value in terms of my rate at which I present my attack surface is between 16 and 25%. What I'm also knowing is it seems like I might be getting worse. I'm not sure. Maybe the bug bounty folks are getting better. Maybe they were on vacation at the first part of the year and now they're doing more. I don't know. The reality is, you've heard of the comment, turtles all the way down. When you get into statistics and causality, probability, you don't always know the underlying causes. But, you know, they say correlation is not causation. I'd say correlation is not causation, but where there's smoke, there's fire, right? The chances are that you actually might be getting worse. And I would be curious about that. So here's the next level of measurement you might want to do if you were in your position, assuming that you're able to get a little bit more data. Let's talk about the method of measuring. We're talking about the vulnerability escape rates. This is a DevOps measure, escape rates of defects, but we're applying it to vulnerabilities by team. Let's assume you can do measurements by Scrum team, right? I got like way too much interaction going on here. I apologize for that. So, all right. So let's assume that you have, I'm assuming that you have some sort of remediation SLA or something like that based on some sort of severity, like P0. You have something that, however you qualify stuff, you say it's a P0, meaning either you remediate in 24 hours or you have a 1 week SLA. You have something. You call that a P0. P0 is defined by how fast you do something, right? Let's say, and then let's say a P1, 2 weeks, a month, whatever your SLA is, and then P2, which no one ever really gets to, is all the rest that you're concerned about that exposes itself. What we're doing in this case, instead of looking at what we did previously, which is the vuln days, now we're looking at vulnerabilities that are created on the inside versus vulnerabilities that escape to the outside. So you have a total set of vulnerabilities, inside, outside. We're still doing hits and misses, but we're considered hits to being those bad boys or girls that escape versus the ones that are inside. This allows you to start getting into a lot of interesting measurement. And that's what this is here. And you can start setting policies, right, in terms of determining how good you are by asking questions of this data. So for example, let's say I want to notice the teams that have a tendency based on whatever little data they have, the teams that seem to be producing externally exploitable vulnerabilities at a rate at 5% or more. That's this here. That's the first one, red. And see the red stuff there? So those would be all the teams where, based on the data, even if they had even if they just released product, let's say 5 or 6 days ago, or they've been in live for a year or two, you can actually call and say, hey, here's all the teams that are producing risk externally that shows up that's of the P0 variety, 5% or more. You can then say, okay, well, how about for the stuff that's called P, and I want to get better than that, by the way. I want to reduce it from 5%. I want to get down to the majority to be below 2%. You're competing, against the bear there, or not against the other hiker. You can go with the P1, which is the black, and then you have the all the rest, your P2s, which are green. You seem to be producing P2s, which are your lower level vulnerabilities, however you categorize them. Maybe use CVSS, some other crap like that. And it looks like it's way out to the right. Observations, escape rate is a DevOps metric. This is DevOps on steroids because I'm using a Bayesian method. I'm using beta binomial distribution, doing lots of crazy math with the help of R in the background. But it becomes a way to incrementally always updating your beliefs about the rate at which you're exposing risks externally. And you can start setting metrics on those rates and say, I need to get the organization as a whole to produce less than, let's say, 5%. We set some targets, becomes mathematically unambiguous. So we use rate as a policy to beat, and we can score the strength of the relationships then as you start getting more data. This is data you probably have, but then you start looking at, okay, in terms of my SDL, let's say you have 200 Scrum teams or 50 Scrum teams. I'm gonna bet that your SDL is not perfectly spread out across all your teams. You're gonna probably have teams that are doing certain practices, teams that are doing other practices, teams that are doing other stuffs, and you'll start having examples of where you can start measuring what's the impact of correlation between those teams that are doing threat modeling and actually putting results in their into Jira, right, for mediation at an architectural perspective versus scanning. Reason I bring this up, I would go into these models, it gets very advanced, is that the book I'm publishing, hopefully I'll get done by 2018, will go into the advanced models, all the software that you guys can actually roll yourself, okay? So what if you have no data though? Let's say, I talked about having a little data. What if you're the kind of person that has no data, or so you think? This is the product or the discussion of my first book. So you have some questions. You want to confront your enterprise security risk, but you seem to have no data. You don't have bug bounty data. Maybe a bug bounty, but you don't have the data. You maybe have some scanning going on. You maybe have some pen testing going on. You may have some fuzzing going on, whatever, but you have no data and you have large enterprise risk. How do you go about thinking about this as well? Well, we can do that, okay? So what does it look like? It's time-based. Again, we're always looking at time. We make multi-year forecasts to help drive strategy. I want to go through this really fast. I have some code to get to. When we look at enterprise risk, we're looking at over time and we're looking at tolerance. I'll share this with you. If you have cyber insurance is a mathematically unambiguous expression of your risk tolerance. The budgets that you receive or don't receive are also mathematically unambiguous expressions of your risk tolerance. I say that fast, you can hear it back in the recording, meaning that your company does have a risk tolerance of some form. It may be unconsciously incompetent, but you still have one. And we can use that as a way to start measuring risk. So it's capability based. Typically, we're looking at capabilities. I had you saw the slide previously of your SDL. You have a capability, and it affords you certain risk management capabilities. Risk becomes a curve. I'm going really fast. We can use this as a method to start looking at and making guesses about our cyber insurance, right? And who uses these sorts of methods, which I'm going to in a moment in some code. These methods are used in big pharma, military logistics, nuclear engineering, epidemiology, meteorologists, project management, et cetera. All these methods used a lot in the movie industry, by the way. A lot of people outside of security are using methods like this to make big forecasts when they have limited data. It's always important to remember that map is not the territory, though, but if correct, it has a similar structure. So how do we do this? How do we get our probabilities? I know I'm going super, super, super fast. The first thing is you need to get comfortable with asking your experts what they think. You need to get comfortable with asking your experts what they think. That sounds odd. They need to get comfortable with encoding their beliefs as probabilities. The problem is we conflate probabilities with reality. We don't use probabilities for reality. Probability theory is the calculus of uncertainty. Math is the calculus of certainty. We use probability theory when we are highly uncertain, not in spite of our uncertainty, all right? And we start asking people to encode their beliefs, what they think, we're gonna ask them on a scale of 0 to 1, right? What they think about the likelihood of something. Now, most people, most security folks in particular, when you ask them to do this, they will say, I think this is complete bullshit. And my response to them is, well, that just means you're normal, right? That's how most people would react to that, right? But what happens is, and I've done this with many, many teams, is you start asking them to encode their beliefs about breach or some possible future risk, and their correlation is very, very high, and they're shocked, like, gosh, I didn't know that. Are we all security lemmings? How is it that we all actually kind of think the same about risk? It just happens, right? So we can start encoding belief. Now, there's a lot of errors in how we think. By the way, what do we learn from Uber? We learned from Uber that self-driving cars, we learned that we're really bad drivers, right? We're just really highly inaccurate creatures, but we can actually make corrections for those foibles. So I participated in one of the largest multi-year studies, including security folks, in terms of modeling beliefs. And what it seems like that we have an error in our brain. It just happens like roughly 21% of the time, we misjudge the same risk. Where you might say one day, this is red hot, and the next day, because someone smiled at us, we say it's medium, right? It happens. I don't know if you've read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. Neil Kahneman, he won the Nobel Prize in economics, but he's a decision psychologist. He's not an economist. It's actually one of the 8 books that Obama recommended all citizens read, so I encourage you to read it. This is his area of study, right? Humans are very fallible in their elicitation of probabilities, but we can correct for that. My view is that we need to train our folks to be bookies. So we can start doing that, be a bookie. By the way, bookies, this has been studied a lot. Do you know that when a bookie says something has a 90% chance of occurring, do you know how often they're correct? This has been studied a lot. 90% of the time, they're correct. When they say something has an 80%, these are the bookies that are still alive, still employed. When a bookie says that something has an 80% chance of occurring, you know how often they're correct? 80%. Bookies are highly calibrated. They make bets with money, and they do have the threat of physical pain that they'll inflict on others or that'll be inflicted upon them. But people get better at this. So this is an example. This is all in R. What I'm looking at is, hey, let's take a look at does our product or whatever it might be, is it internet exposed or not? When I say internet exposed, I mean is it addressable in a way that anyone can reach out and touch it, right? Does it have data value? Is there PHI or PII? Is there something that a bad guy can monetize? Yes or no? Boolean true. So exposure, Boolean true. Data value, Boolean true. And then you have processes. You can have an assurance process, which is security architecture. You can have vulnerability management processes, right, which is all your SAST, DAST, pen testing, blah, blah, blah. And then you have incident response processes, and you have those as capabilities. So you can go ahead and affix ordinal values to that. And then you have your team go through and say what they think the likelihood of breach is in 1 year given these states. Right? And they do it, and they feel very uncomfortable, they think it's bullshit, they hate you for doing it, and then you get the results, they go, oh my God, look at this, we have a 90% R2, we seem to think somewhat similar. You then use that for a model. Likewise, you could go through and start, this is one you're gonna really hate, you can go ahead and start modeling the impact of records loss. How many of you heard that it's impossible to measure based on records to make a forecast about loss? Have you heard that? This has been a big, yeah, one person, good. Okay, so the big thing is that people say you cannot forecast what the impact of breach will be based on records loss. And I would say, well, I don't know why, what stops you. So I actually created a hyper naive model that looks at both impact from a legal perspective and from an IT perspective, penance project perspective. And we actually modeled it based on data. And as I've gotten more data externally, included that in a simple model. Here I asked, what's the impact between 10 million records, and actually it's 5 billion records, and it spits out this number that was between 1.5 million and 21 million. We can run this over and over again, and it has a lot of uncertainty programmed into it. But it just so happens to be, this is even prior to Yahoo. They had $16 million in fines, and the model predicted it pretty decently. A lot of uncertainty still, but pretty decently. We can actually do this. Again, if our aim is to beat the bear and not perfection, then we can start modeling things. So we can bring these things together. I'm going to go really fast into the types of bets we can make. So we can ask questions of our model, right? Our model is an encoding of our beliefs about impact. It's an encoding of our beliefs about breach. It's not true, it's a model. It's just a consistent model, it's mathematically unambiguous. I can ask questions about what's the likelihood of losing 10 million or more in 1 year. What does my model say, my dumb little model? And my dumb model says there's a 20% chance. I ask, okay, well, what about the same thing but at $50 million? So there's a 1% chance. Okay, what about over 3 years? What's the likelihood of losing $50 million or more over 3 years where I've modeled in improvement in capabilities, right? We've matured our SDL. We've gone to where we have SLA-based remediation. We've added in, pen testing, both external, internal, blah, blah, blah. We show that maturity. My model says you should see a 2.4% improvement. Great, a 2.4% chance of losing $50 million one or more time in 3 years. Okay, what should I expect to lose just on average, right? On average, given the model that I've made of you guys, and my model, year one says 6.5 million. Okay, how about year two, assuming year 1 to year 2 capability improvements, which I've modeled in, assuming I get investments, I make some changes, it says this. All right, well the question then is, what's my ROI? Assuming that I spend $1 million, my security budget's $1 million, what's my return on investment? What does my model say? It's not reality, it's helping me think, it's a prosthetic for my brain. It says about a 24% ROI on that investment. Okay, what if that investment though, let's say sales says, hey, if you do this, we'll be able to go PCI, we'll be able to enter some new markets, blah, blah, blah. We believe that it'll increase sales from 10 million to 50 million. We don't trust salespeople, so we take the 10 million number, the lower bound number, we add that in our model, and that says we have a return on investment of over 1,000%. You might think, well, that's great, 1,000%. That's not the point. The point is we're starting to score things to help us make decisions, right? It's just a way of scoring. So when we're uncertain about, when you typically have a heat map, you'll put all the scary things up in the right-hand corner. You have no way to discern what's more important. This gives you a way to start saying, okay, how do I start deciding in a consistent way, in a mathematically unambiguous way, to make decisions? So I know that's a lot. This is all recorded. I have a whole book on this, by the way. I recommend it if you have problems with sleep, if you don't sleep well. My first book's really good. If you are into, as most security folks are, into pressing flowers, it is very good for that. And based on one of the Amazon reviews, I also know that if we were to get into a dystopian future, the paper's thin enough you can use it for multiple purposes. So, so you'll be, if you're stuck in an airport and you know don't have paper. So the second half of my presentation is about my first book. How do you start using modern methods, Monte Carlo scenarios, what have you, to start basically understanding your uncertainty? Monte Carlo methods came about during the invention of the atomic bomb. Despite the nefarious past, it's great for creating data when you have highly uncertain inputs, which we do have in security. The first part are empirical-based models where you get hits and misses. Again, days, right, where you have an event or didn't have an event, and or getting into specific events that happen in your SDL, particularly in DevOps. So the second book, again, which will come out, will have a lot of methods. They're very much oriented more towards DevOps. And in fact, I'll be doing some research with some companies, one of the larger boutique security firms that has over 15 years of pen testing data. We'll be doing research with them. There's a large OSINT organization as well, where we'll be applying these models to look at them and to learn. And so you could actually use some of the data from that and use the models. The point is, we can do a lot with a little. We can do a lot to understand more about the risk that we're creating, both in terms of expansion of the attack surface and getting smaller. And I think that this is important for us as security to really mature as a discipline, to really become more, I suppose, scientific in our approach to how we do security. We don't do that, and our vendors don't really do that as well. But we can take the data that we have from vendors and with our brains and with your brains, make it better. I know that was fast. I want to give some time to answer any questions you may have about the book or future book or anything else. Yes, sir. They want me to publish it in September, and I said no. So probably in January. It might come out sooner than that, but I'm looking to do I want to do some research with some large data sets, because security folks like that. Yeah, well, so the thing is, by the way, I say we don't know a lot about breach. Vulnerabilities, the reason we have these things, you don't know how many vulnerabilities you really have, right? I mean, you find out about them, maybe they may have been there for a long time. And you find out about them later. And that gets into survival analysis, by the way. And that's what we want to know. We want to know how long our organization tends to allow things to persist. So you're doing survival analysis, ideally from inception to correction. Most security, though, goes from detection to correction. But the reality is there's this whole economy that happens back there, which is the area of interest. That's actually where security happens. You know that. Security happens before you find out, usually. And so we want to, that's called survival analysis. By the way, that's how everyone else measures bad stuff. That's how epidemiologists do it. No one, yeah, you got cancer or you have heart disease, that's bad, but we want to make a prognosis. We have to know something we have to make some guesses about how long it lived. But this retains your uncertainty. You really actually don't know how many vulnerabilities you actually have at any time. I'm sure you'll find out. But yeah, thank you. Another question. Someone else had raised their hands, unless I just scared them away. Yes. Yes. So the question is, can this be applied to insurance? Yes. I've used these methods myself to apply to insurance. So a little, maybe unknown secret. You'd like to think. So our book, is the only security book that's required reading. If you're going to become an actuary, you have to read our book. As of 2018, only security book. So we're really stoked about that. And actuaries have the best parties. So most brokers will go and they'll look at your market. They'll look at, okay, you're here, you're an internet company, whatever you do this. I'll look at 20 other companies that are like you and see what they have, and I'll give you some kind of premium and whatnot coverage that looks similar to them. That's their model. But let's say you persist 2 trillion records of data, MPI or PII, and they didn't include that in their model, right? You may look the same size, you may be in the same market, you may be doing whatever, an API company or a banking company or a healthcare company, whatever. These models are for you, though. It's for you to go and look at this and go, okay, well, it seems like it's high. My sense is, based on what I know of our capabilities, right, the data I have maybe from my experts, it would seem that I have a lot of value at risk. And it allows you to go and say, okay, based on this value at risk, I would like to get 10 million, 20 million more insurance at this premium. And it becomes a simple conversation. Oh, all the models that I showed, everything, even the beta and the Markovs, those are all on the website for free, downloadable spreadsheets. You can go to howtomeasureanything.com/security, and they're all there. The R stuff's not there. That will be in the next book. But yeah, these are methods that actuaries would use, and we know that because they have to read my book now. So, yeah. I'm not an actuary, though. I just go to their parties. There's a question over here. Someone had a question? No? No? Oh, yes, sir. I don't know about that. All I know is that when you're in business, you want to protect yourself from loss. And if you have some altruistic thing, I guess I'd figure out a way to monetize that and measure against that. We've just, my models are oriented towards empirical evidence, where you even though you might be making some wild ass guesses, they're informed by your collective wild ass guesses at the very least. And so, like reputation, for example, reputation. Well, here's another fact. I talked about public breaches. There's another thing about reputation. Do you know there's no such thing as private reputation loss? I think that's called self-centeredness. I'm not sure what that is. But anyways, it's only public reputation, but public reputation should be monetizable. It should turn into something that's monetizable, right? If you have bad reputation, you could see in theory stock price impact. You'd think in theory, you would think you could lose sales, or you would see what we usually see in our field is we see penance projects, typically legal fees and some IT spend is typically what we see post breach, right? But yeah. If you want to do something out of altruism, just do it. You don't need a model. But good question, Alex. Alex is with Wallarn, so yes.
So in your models, you talked about some people not having the data. So do you use essentially another way to look at that?
Sure. So in this model here, we talk about escape rates. Escape rates is if you look at if you were to Google like top DevOps metrics that you should be looking at, there's escape rate is one of them. And that's where you're looking at bad software that either gets out to production or not, and use that as a total, right? They don't use Bayesian methods, but you could use any sort of input you want. The question you have is, what is the rate or the count that bad stuff gets basically customer facing in this use case? But you can actually look at maybe you have multiple quality gates in I don't know how you do your DevOps, but you might have multiple processes. You could actually use the same method to look at stage to stage to stage, and look to make improvements. Say, okay, it looks like we're getting to this point here, and vulnerabilities of this class or this nature at this layer of the stack are getting here at this rate. We're going to set a goal, and going to beat the bear. We're going to set a goal to reduce it by this much. And it can be any sort of input that you want, right? I would say you would want to normalize your data, though, if you have double counting coming from tool sets. Yeah. Yes, sir. So the question was, am I concerned about garbage in, garbage out, using bad data, bad models, and things like that? Yeah. I don't want to use bad models. So George Box, famous statistician, he said, all models are wrong, and some models are useful. We update in our book saying all models are wrong, some models are useful, and some models are measurably more useful than others. Does the model or thing that I'm doing give me an improvement that shows up empirically, in this case in a reduction in the amount of bad stuff that's getting out? If so, then my models help me. If it doesn't, by the way, it's a useful outcome. If your model doesn't help you measure something, you've actually just learned something. I can't use that model for this. You're smarter. Yeah. I'm wrapped up. All right. Cool. Thank you.